della Mobiliare non
Sono molto di corsa perché sono al festival, sto aspettando noi. Da mercoledì prossimo in avanti. No, ma sono al festival.
Hello, good afternoon. It is with a great pleasure that we are having today with us Deborah Landis, and she will be in conversation with Jay Weissberg about some very interesting matters about costume design, Hollywood movies, and I want you to welcome Deborah Landis and Jay Weissberg.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for showing up for costume design. Do we use these?
Later on, when there are questions from
All
the
right.
audience.
All right.
Is this on? Yes. Okay, great. The conversation is going to be in English. There is simultaneous translation as well for those people who need it, and it's also being live streamed. A bit of feedback. So thank you very much for coming. We're going to be talking about various elements of both Professor Landis's career and the craft of costume design, which is something that tends to be either ignored or rather taken for granted far more often than it should. So that's really, I think, one of the key things we'll be discussing. I would like to start by asking you about whether there was a moment early on, before you sort of knew what you wanted to do as perhaps in a career, when you realized that the clothes that somebody was wearing on screen wasn't simply something that was attractive, but something that was right for that character.
Well, I think that there's a misunderstanding about what costume design is and the role that costume designers play in movies. And I have two stories because along the way, I've learned so much myself about costume design. I had a feeling about what it was, but I could never articulate it. And then I met a couple of people who helped me. So in 2003, I had finished my doctorate, and I thought, you know, there's so much misunderstanding about costume design. Maybe we should have a really big exhibition, which would be a great teaching tool where I have an exhibition and teach the public about what it is we really did. So I went to the Museum of Modern Art, and I spoke to the major curator of cinema at the Museum of Modern Art. Museum of Modern Art has had cinema since they opened in 1927. And I met with Mary Lee Bandy, now sadly passed. And we sat down, and I said, I'd like to have a conversation and do this exhibition about costume design. And I started talking about what it is we really did. And after I spoke to her for a while, she said, costume, that's such a bad word for what you do. Have you got another word? Costume. Because costume to everybody else means, you know, Halloween, right, carnival, cosplay, dress up. Do you have another word? And that was so provocative. And then the next thing I said was, well, I want to explore the craft of costume design. And she did this. She said, Deborah, the American Craft Museum is a block over. And if you want to talk about the craft, go to the American Craft Museum. This is the Museum of Modern Art.
Because craft in the U.S., when you think of craft, quilting and
that's right,
a sort of home arts, one might say.
Yeah, craft, you know. And she said, this is a Museum of Modern Art. Can we start talking about the art of costume design? All right, second story. I had the privilege of spending time with Piero Tosi, the greatest costume designer. Just passed away almost 2 years ago, Piero Tosi. So Piero Tosi told me a story about when he was designing a contemporary movie in the early 1950s here in Italy. And of course, Piero Tosi is best known for Gattopardo, The Leopard, and Ludwig, and Death in Venice, and extraordinary films with period costumes. And he was designing a contemporary movie. So what did he do? All movies require research, and Tosi went to the train station in Milan. And his research was not historic research, but contemporary research. And he sat in the train station and took pictures of people coming on and off the train. So after a while, he saw a woman getting off the train, and she looked absolutely perfect for a character in the film that Anna Magnani was playing. And he ran up to the woman and he said, can I buy your sweater? That sweater is so perfect. And he told me I was completely crazy because the sweater was just right. And the woman said, no, you can't buy my sweater. Please leave me alone, And he said, but I'm designing a movie. She listened, and he said, this is the perfect sweater for Anna Magnani. And she stopped and she said, oh, for Anna Magnani, you can have the sweater. You can have my sweater. So he got the sweater for Anna Magnani. Now, this story, you asked me, when did I have my epiphany about what it meant? I understood very early that costumes were not created for the outside. I understood early that the role of the costume designer was to help create an individual personality. But I couldn't articulate it until I learned it from other individuals. Until I really was a grown-up and was taught these lessons by Mary Lee Bandy or Tosi, because it just reconfirmed what I already had understood. Mm-hmm. It's not that I don't love clothes. I love clothes, and I love fashion. But looking out at all of you, and I don't mean this as an insult, I understand that costume is not about fashion. Because if we had to costume this tent right now, we wouldn't be talking fashion. I'd have to ask each and every one of you something about yourselves in order to do a good job to bring your stories to life. So it's a complicated job. It's not really a job about fancy dress. It's a job also about, like everybody who works in film, like all of us collaborators, it's also a job of disappearing into the film. So sometimes, often Jay, the best costumes are those you don't notice, like the cardigan for Anna Magnani. Mm-hmm. Just a woman getting off the train.
what you were saying about Mary Lee Bandy saying, no, let's not talk about craft,
Yeah.
though. But then you said that you learned so much from her as well. I'm curious about that because craft is a key part of obviously of not just construction of clothes, construction of character, of an understanding. And I'd like to also then, after that, talk about how that relates to other people in the film team and what kind of collaborations that brings out.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say that costume design is really an intellectual pursuit because, I understand that I was teaching at University of Southern California, and I like to teach filmmakers because I always feel like costume designers already know what we do. Right? Filmmakers tend to say, oh, I don't know anything about clothes. To which I've always said, well, listen, you've written this script, or you're going to make this movie. Let's bring the people in the screenplay to life. Do you understand about that? Oh, yeah, I want to do that. I want to bring them to life. Well, how do we begin to bring them to life? Who are they? Who are you? And how does that express itself in your closet? What are your choices, right? So in terms of the skill, my feeling is that I have to help create costume designers who can read a screenplay, analyze the screenplay, discuss the story with the filmmaker, and then, like Tozy, go out there. We're anthropologists. Go out there, discover who those people are, and then bring choices to the director. Who is he? Who is she? Who are they? Right? So, the craft comes into it. Yes, we have to, ultimately, it's helpful to know something about fabrics. Yes, it's helpful to know something about construction. Yes, it's helpful to have a great background in history and history of fashion. But ultimately, it's the sensitivity to people because stories are about the human condition, about recognizing ourselves in the story, about being connected to the story. And this takes a tremendous amount of sensitivity. So that's where it pulls away from the making and becomes something more.
I'm delighted you've been mentioning Tozy because the collaborations that he had with Visconti were so crucial, and clearly they were working together so closely, which comes through in every film that they worked on together. And of course, Visconti was famously obsessive about every detail. The stories of in Il Gattopardo needing flowers in a room where they weren't even going to be shooting because that was what would have been done in that palazzo at that time. How common would you say it is in your career and in the careers of other costume designers to have directors who are so keen on working together, on collaborating early on with the costume designer?
You see it over and over and over again in terms of collaborations. So, not only, I'm sorry to go back to Tozy, but we are in Italy. I think it's important to, and because he was...
Switzerland. We're in Switzerland, actually, but Italian-speaking Switzerland.
Please forgive me. Please forgive me. So, I just have to say with Tozy, it wasn't just Visconti. He was also very close with Zeffirelli. He worked for Pasolini. And he did tell me stories of Fellini calling him in the middle of the night and just driving him from Rome to the coast just to talk. Just to talk. These kind of collaborations are throughout movies when directors, when filmmakers find collaborators that they trust, they stick with them. Because there's an implied promise that you, the composer, the production designer, the cinematographer, the costume designer, those key creative collaborators understand me, and you will show up with the goods, we speak the same language. Now, this is a hard-won collaboration. Take a designer, another Italian who I admire, Milena Canonero. She was the premier designer for Stanley Kubrick. Well, after Stanley died, she became a collaborator with Warren Beatty, but also now, after working with Francis Coppola, she's now the creative collaborator with Wes Anderson and designed a few of Wes's films, including Budapest Hotel, and then she's working with Wes right now, right? They're working in Spain. How does this happen? Does Budapest Hotel have anything to do with Barry Lyndon? Not really, right?
Right.
Right? I have collaborated with Steven Spielberg, but I also designed my husband's comedies. So this working as an interpreter with a filmmaker it's not about my work. It's about working together to help that filmmaker, a little bit like a midwife, bring the vision of the story to life. And what's right for any of those Kubrick films and what's right for Wes Anderson, can you think of two more different artistic visions, right? I think these collaborations are certainly throughout Hollywood history, where someone says, come on, we're going to be doing a movie, and let's go.
I like that you use the word midwife, but I'm also wondering whether, at what point it also transforms into being governess as well, because midwife says you've given birth and then you leave. But I know that that's not the role of a costume designer. Isn't somebody who just says, okay, these are the clothes, they're on a rack, and time to go. You're with the film, you're with the process.
Yeah.
Could you describe that?
Yeah, well, I pull back from governance because we certainly don't mother those directors. That's for sure. That's for sure. Well, actually, at this point, I should say what the general audience usually asks is, well, what about the actor? Right? What about the actor? The actor's missing from the conversation. And it's so funny because the relationship is so intimate with the actor, but the actors very often are the last to know. The actors show up, and they've been working on another movie and on location, and they show up to the fitting room, and they say, who am I? Please let me know who I am. What do I wear? There are actors who are quite different than that, of course, like Daniel Day-Lewis or Robert De Niro, for example, who they would like to wear the shoes a month before they start working. They would like to wear the jacket before they start working. They want to have that full transformation before they start working. But the actor very much is part of this collaboration. It's very much a love triangle, as it were. But I think that the director is absolutely key, and you can imagine, Jay, it can be exactly the same screenplay, but if the director is David Fincher, it's going to be one movie, and if the director is Tim Burton or Guillermo del Toro or John, it's going to be a different movie. And it can be absolutely the same words on paper, but those people are going to cast differently. The tone is going to be different. And all of us, the creative collaborators, are going to read that screenplay And we're not going to anticipate, we're not going to second guess that director, and we're going to say, tell me about this movie. Tell me about this production. What is it? How do you see it? The director is the communicator in chief. And the other funny thing, Jay, is that so often the general public will think that the costume designer chooses what everyone wears, and that's what appears on screen. But everything on screen is chosen ultimately by the director, or in television by the showrunner.
Mm-hmm. So would you consider yourself an auteurist?
Yes, an auteurist, yes, I can't work without a screenplay. I don't work without a screenplay and a director. Is that an auteurist?
Just in the sense that the director is the auteur of a film rather than a collaborative effort. That there's the decision making is truly from the top and everything else descends from it.
Yes, I think so. There's one cook in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think we are the sous chefs, absolutely. We bring all of our talent to one person. And that's also true in television. I mean, I have a friend, Michelle Clapton, who designed Game of Thrones, all of Game of Thrones, and she said that the showrunners chose everything, made every decision, and the directors who came in to direct all of those magnificent episodes had absolutely no say.
Yeah.
The showrunners said, it's this and this and this, shall I, glasses on, glasses off. That's all the showrunners who were the writers of those series.
How often are you also working with the cinematographers?
Well, the cinematographer sets the tone of the film, and again, it's the general misunderstanding about cinematography is that it's about cameras when it's about lighting.
Yeah.
Right? So it is all about lighting. We have to see the actor in order to hear the actor. So it's less desirable for me to be in black in front of a black screen, right? Mm-hmm. It's more desirable for you to be in a striped shirt behind a blue background. So we have to make sure that we can see the actors. So we have those conversations. But very often the cinematographer comes on late as well. It's more about the production design and the costume design being the yin and the yang, the world and the people in it of the screen, right? So our partner is production design, art direction.
But I'd like to, if you could speak a little bit more about how you, I appreciate what you said about where you're not a governess, you're not mothering the clothes that are being worn, but what is the process after the designing is done, after the selection of costumes is done? How are you following it through the production?
Well, there is an essentialness to the costume designer being there. I mean, so let me go back to this. All stories, every story has costumes. Actors don't wear their own clothes. So every story, with the exception of documentaries, are fiction.
Yes.
So it's always the creation of the personality and the individual. Sometimes we get to design fantasy, sometimes period, and most often it's a modern story. Modern stories are the most difficult to design because everyone in the audience is an expert in their own clothes and in the now, right? No one in the audience is an expert in period fashion, I don't think, right? So you wouldn't know if it was 1895 or 1885. Most people wouldn't know. They have to trust us. So going back to the question of nannying or looking at the actor, it is true that we never have enough time to finish all of the clothes, for all of the scenes, and movies are never shot in continuity. Productions are never shot in continuity, so it's never from the beginning to the end, right? Very often you can be shooting the last scene the first day of shooting. It's bizarre but true. And so we need to be there to make sure everything is right and correct at the beginning of every morning. We started about 5 o'clock in the morning with our coffee. Then at daybreak, we're there. The actor is on the set. We check. How are you feeling, Jay? You look pretty good. I like that thing around your neck. Your beautiful watch. You're all together. Green suede shoes. Okay. I think you look pretty good. Jay, how are you feeling?
Fine, I'm feeling very good.
You're feeling very good. All right, well, you're in this costume all day. If you need a change of shirt, I've left John with 2 or 3 shirts, exactly the same. So if you get sweaty or you need to change or you drop some pasta at lunch and we have to wash the shirt, we have another shirt for you. Okay, Jay, is it okay? I'm going to leave now and prepare for tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what a costume designer does. And we stay, make sure it's great, make sure, John, are you okay with the clothes today? Not so much. Okay, I'll see you at lunch. We'll take a break. And that's it. Right. And we do as much as we can prior to the film. But I have to be there every day, sure, just to check, to set the clothes.
Most of the films, I think I'm accurate in saying that most of the films that you've designed for have been contemporary. Yeah. So the most difficult. But you've also worked a lot in theater. You've worked in opera as well.
Yes.
And what you were saying about period costume, that most people aren't experts whether something was in 1885 or 1895.
Yes.
How accurate do you feel you need to be?
Never. Never. I hate to go back to Tosi, but he did. I mean, that's the thing about costume design. We are big liars. We are liars, but we're all liars in the movies. We're terrible because, I mean, with Tosi, he told me that in Gattapardo there's a scene with the army. Mm-hmm. And he saw the original costumes, which were, the original uniforms were blue. He didn't like the blue. He said, I can make a better blue. And he changed the blue of the real costumes because he made a better blue. He said, this is a much prettier blue. They should have been this blue. Right? Mm-hmm. So he changed the blue. And I think that, history can always be improved. And it ultimately comes down to what is right. What is right? What looks right? What feels right? What's more attractive? If your leading man needs to look attractive, if you have Alain Delon or anyone, and the blue should match his eyes, right? We're big liars. We're creatures of the theater, and so what we're tasked with is to make the experience absolutely transformative and pleasurable for the audience, and also to take people on a journey and to lose yourself in a movie. And when it needs to be glamorous, we can deliver glamour. And what is glamour but beauty plus power? So we can do that. Sexy, we can do that. Or to be completely invisible, so you notice nothing but you hear everything,
One of the wonderful things about listening to you talk about the process of costume design is you capture a sense of magic, of bringing a certain magic to the audience. And that is a perfect moment for me then to shift the conversation a little bit to discuss how you've championed the costume design, the history of costume design. So I'd like to get back to the essential exhibition that you did on Hollywood costume design. And I'd wonder if you could talk about what gave you that idea, and even more perhaps, how you think that helped to other people to understand the role of costume design in cinema.
Well, as I said, if the ultimate costume design is the music that you don't hear, if the ultimate idea is that when you watch a movie that you don't notice anything, but you're in the movie, then how do you know if it's good? Because my favorite quote is of all people from Jerry Bruckheimer. Jerry Bruckheimer is a producer of some really bad movies, but really successful movies. And he said that we're in the transportation business. And I love that because really the most successful movies is when you're watching a movie, you don't know where you are. You're completely lost. Mm-hmm. You're in the movie. That's my goal. I mean, I think when you watch a movie, you should just be in it. And then when you see it the second time, maybe you can say, wow, weren't the clothes great? Or that score, that score just swept me away. Or, I think that ultimately I thought about doing this, curating this grand exhibition when I finished my doctorate. Because really, and I don't know about, I know people don't think about doctoral dissertations, but it's a great opportunity to sit down. It's a great luxury for a practitioner to sit down and write about what they've been doing for the past 30 years. And I was thinking about it, and then I thought, what's the biggest classroom that I could have? And it was at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And in it, I displayed costumes like the costume from the Bourne Identity, mm-hmm. right? And the Big Lebowski that Jeff Bridges wore in the Big Lebowski. It was a terry cloth robe and shorts and flip-flops from the Big Lebowski. Why would I do that? And I put that next to the big green velvet dress that Vivian Leigh wore, designed by Walter Plunkett from Gone with the Wind. Mm-hmm. How do you put the Big Lebowski next to Gone with the Wind? Well, that's the point. What's right for the Big Lebowski is not right for Gone with the Wind. So I tried to tell that story in the exhibition, and the exhibition I hope was what I know was a great success.
It was a fantastic success, and I think it really did change how people were thinking about costume design in cinema. And then it traveled, of course, which was also important.
Yes, it traveled all over the world. And I have to say, Jay, Jay, I'm sure everyone knows that you're the director of Cinemamuto.
Maybe, I don't know.
Well, Jay is the director of Cinemamuto, the greatest silent film festival in the world. And costuming started when film began. Costuming started at the birth of film. Costumes started. And everyone is very familiar with Méliès, who had designed his own costumes for his films.
I'm going to see if there are any questions in the audience now. We're going to continue the conversation. Yes, okay, let's.
Hello, thank you for this masterclass. I'd like to ask you if the digital revolution then changed a lot of the profession in cinema, in a way changed also costume designing, or it's still an artisanal way? Does something change with green screen, with CGI? It impacted in a way your kind of work in making a movie?
Well, yes, absolutely. Now, we've had green screen for a very, very long time, right? So green screen has existed for a very, very long time. But there are a couple of things. So remember Lord of the Rings. That feels like 100 years ago, doesn't it? So Lord of the Rings was really shot in front of green screens. And if you see the making of Lord of the Rings, it was amazing because they're all on horses, all fighting with this wraparound green screen. It's absolutely crazy. So the costume designer was a New Zealander named Nyla Dixon. And Lord of the Rings took a very, very long time. And almost every frame of that film, or of that trilogy, was hand-painted. In the end, almost all of them were hand-painted because they went through so many digital processes, and there was so much animation. And Nyla Dixon said that ultimately her costumes could have been white because none of them were the original color that they actually were. She made them in one color, but after Peter Jackson finished directing it, with all of the different layers and all of the compositing, the clothes changed color because the frame was completely a painted frame. Do you understand? So what's happened now is the digital era has affected costume design in many, many ways. Now, nothing has changed from the original purpose that I expressed. In other words, that costume design is there to support the story and to create these individuals that we love and that we care about. That has not changed, and that will never change because it's absolutely the same as telling a story by a campfire. You have to bring meaning to your story. However, there are crafty ways that the digital world has provided. For instance, we don't deal with blood anymore. Blood is mostly digital. When you shoot somebody, very rarely does anyone wear practical squibs. So you're not rigging for squibs. Do you know what I mean? So you're not rigging for explosions or squibs. You don't get dirty so much anymore. So much of that can be put in digitally in post-production. Yes, we use a lot of green screen, but it's really even more sophisticated now. So some of those backgrounds can be done in post-production. So in terms of our own work, we can keep track of continuity using a app called Sync on Set, which everybody has on their phones. So in terms of continuity, all I have to do is take Jay's picture. I actually, in a fitting room, I can take Jay's picture and I can dress him in a number of changes, and I can send it to the director and say, do you like A, do you like B, do you like C? So in terms of craftiness, it's provided us with a lot of shortcuts. In terms of drawing, we can put the actor's face into the drawing so that it's exactly Jay in a fabulous costume of whatever you like, Jay.
Whatever you want to dress to.
Whatever you want to be, Jay. And so in that way it's changed. So it's changed in superficial ways, but the purpose hasn't changed. The purpose is always going to be the same.
There was another question here.
Hi. Somebody following us live would like to know from you if you had the idea for the Indiana Jones costume during the 80s, and if so, how did you come up with this idea?
The India, whether you had the
Jones.
right, exactly, whether that was your decision to dress.
So Indiana Jones, well, I have to say, I designed a really big flop called 1941. And when you make a movie, you have no idea, right? So you design, everyone on a film hopes that every movie is going to be a huge success. And two parts, that we hope it's going to be a great movie, two parts. and a big success, because a great movie can also not be a big success, and a bad movie can also be a big success, right? So we worked on, I designed 1941 for Steven Spielberg, and then I went on to design the Blues Brothers, and while I was designing the Blues Brothers for John, I received the script for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And Steven came to see us in Chicago, which is why Steven Spielberg is at the end of the Blues Brothers with the money for John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. Why was he in Chicago? He was in Chicago to see me to talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I got Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Steve really knew what that character looked like. And it was based on a archetype that had existed in Hollywood, an adventurer. And you can see that archetype in two Charlton Heston films, The Lost Treasure of the Incas and Greatest Show on Earth. Charlton Heston is wearing a brown fedora and a leather jacket. And in fact, there were, in the 1940s, there were Saturday morning serials with this kind of adventurer archetype. So I regret to say that I am not the mother of the archetype, I am simply the mother of Indiana Jones, right? So also, and I know that everyone knows, that Tom Selleck was going to be Indiana Jones, and I did make the costume for Tom Selleck. I had it made, so it was drawn and made, and Tom Selleck was so gorgeous. He was so gorgeous, and we were so disappointed when he became Magnum. It was a sad day, I'll tell you. Yeah. He was really, really good looking. And then we didn't have anybody. And the truth is, and of course, I've said this before, so it shouldn't be new, but we were told that Han Solo was going to be Indiana Jones. And we were really disappointed. And then Han Solo came in, and he was no Tom Selleck.
Have you told Harrison Ford that?
Oh, he knows. Yeah, Tom Selleck is so great. But anyway, then I dressed Han Solo, and he became Indiana Jones. So that's the story. But I had Stephen actually draw it for me at home in my son's room, in our son's room. I have a wonderful drawing of that Stephen drew for me. It looks just like a 12-year-old boy drew it, with a hat. It's a 6'1.5" with the jacket, and it's very cute. So I knew what it was going to be. It had to be just one thing. It had to be a fedora, a leather jacket, and those. He's actually wearing wool trousers. He's wearing shoes that I bought, work boots that Harrison liked, because Harrison was a carpenter. So work boots that I bought in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And you never know. Because I've had the opportunity to design costumes that had this second life, and I'm not the only one, but other costume designers as well have done this, and costumes that are constantly used for Halloween or are recognizable. Yeah. I'm often asked, well, you must have known that this would be iconic. And nobody knows. And I certainly didn't know. I was just doing my job, and it's the audience that makes the icons. Not the filmmakers, not the designers, not the filmmakers. It's the audience. The audience has to fall madly in love. When the audience falls madly in love, that's the icon.
But the audience falls madly in love because the director and the equipe have given us that. They've given us that gift.
It's but it's a gift, but we work on it the same way. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. You make Some Like It Hot, and then you make a flop. I don't know. You make Jaws, and then you make 1941. I don't know. It couldn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely it can.
Right?
You were talking about, particularly with the Indiana Jones, looking at several Charlton Heston films.
Yeah.
Earlier you were talking about Piero Tosi going to a train station and just watching people. So
Yeah.
you're getting, you in particular, the inspirations that you're getting come from where? Clearly, they come from earlier cinema, but they're coming from people on the street. They're coming from the shops where you buy shoes. How do you almost sometimes feel bombarded with too much influence?
No, I don't think so. I think it's the zeitgeist. Mm-hmm. It's the reason why movies always look like the time in which we're made. And everyone knows this. John and I were watching Charlie's Angels on television last night. And Charlie's Angels look so terrible. Yeah. It looks so much of its time. Those women are so painted, and their hair and their clothes look so awful.
But they're Italian.
Yeah, and John said their Italian was wonderful. I mean, if you look at, you can look at Jane Austen movies, and you can tell if they were made in the 70s, 80s, 90s. You can always tell when a movie was made because it always looks like the time in which it was made. We can't escape our time. And even with the best taste, even Tosi, Claudia Cardinale, when you look at her face, something about her pale lips, somehow there's some 60s there. You can just tell the time. Movies are not supposed to be accurate. And I think the influences for costume design are everywhere. And the inspiration is from everything. I think we're creative artists. I don't think there's a certain level of intelligence, inspiration. I think the word is literacy. So I think we have to be culturally literate. We have to be literate in terms of fashion, but it's not about fashion. I think the influence is from everything. It's from the zeitgeist, and it's circular. We feed, you were saying where the influence from a movie can ignite trends, right?
Yes.
So where somebody, Donatella Versace sees Fight Club, and suddenly there's a Fight Club line of clothes for men, right? So, but she never acknowledges the costume designer Michael Kaplan, who designed Fight Club, right? So I think that movies influence culture and popular culture and fashion. And then movies are influenced by popular culture. So it's circular.
You mentioned bad taste with Charlie's Angels.
Yeah.
So do you see certain periods as having worse taste than others?
No. I don't mean that. I mean in retrospect. I mean, I want to give Charlie's Angels its due. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of Charlie's Angels fans out there. No. You can't look back at something and say it's bad taste. And look, bad taste is sometimes great.
Well, I was going to say, do you have fun designing bad taste?
Oh, yeah. I think that's one of the reasons I never wanted a Louis Vuitton bag. Yeah, because because it has so many meanings, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? No.
Really? Everybody knows everything already?
Yes, in the back, and then okay.
You talked about like the people, the main characters, designing them, but how much sorry how important is it to design the extras, the ones in the background? Is that important as well, or?
Well, the funny thing is, you can't trust a director. So the extra might be the principal when they cross in front of Brad Pitt. So you always have to make sure that everyone is seen by the director, right? And by the costume designer. And actually a smart director will have the costume designer have the conversation with the second AD when they're placing people in a shot, because you never know where that actor's going to be. So for instance, the woman sitting in front of you is wearing a very bright yellow shirt, right? So I can see her very well, and thank goodness you're wearing like a dark shirt. So if she had some important dialogue, that would be very helpful that you were in the dark shirt. But if the situation was reversed, and she was sitting behind you in that bright yellow shirt, and you were delivering the important piece of dialogue that the audience really had to hear, that would be problematic because I would be looking at her, right? So everyone in the scene has to be evaluated. I mean, in this corner, the most important person in this corner would be that woman in the yellow shirt, followed by this woman in the print. You would have to be the second lead. You could be the friend of the woman in the yellow shirt, right? Because I see you pretty well, so you two could have the conversation. Whereas you two people in the back, I'm really sorry, you would have to be the ND extras, right? Nondescript extras. The most important person in this room, let's see, I think it's yellow shirt is still the winner. Followed by this striped shirt. That's pretty bright too. All right, but the prints are pretty important. So everyone in the scene has to be looked at, because a scene is just a rectangle, and this is our proscenium, right? So, you asked about the digital era, but it really won't change until we can bring everyone to life in 3 dimensions, like in the theater. Because right now, we're still limited to our rectangle. The rectangle is this big, the rectangle is this big, the rectangle is this big, the rectangle is in the square. So as long as we're working in a rectangle, everything in that rectangle is there for a deliberate narrative purpose. It's telling the story, the narrative story, and the visual story. And everything in that square, or in that rectangle, is chosen by the director to be there, to move that story forward.
There was a question here.
I was wondering, how did you start working in the film? How did you enter this ambient? Like you did a school and then started working, or there was something else? I don't know. I'm sorry.
Was the question how I started working?
Yes.
Well, the song I was born this way. I was born this way. So I absolutely was born this way. I have had a passion for clothes and for history from the time I was born. I don't remember a time where I didn't love it. And what was interesting for me was that I didn't have much of an interest in fashion. I grew up in New York City. I went to the theater. I stood in the back of the theater. Something about storytelling and the imagination. But I also, from the very time I was a little girl, my grandmother taught me how to sew. She had a treadle machine, and I had my fingers in between the treadle machine. I learned how to sew. I'm a terrible seamstress. I know how to knit. I started to knit when I was a little girl. I told Jay I can do everything, including bob and lace, including bob and lace. So in terms of the craft, I was always good with my hands. And I have a very conventional education. I mean, I really have a lot of education. So I went to college. I started as a history major, but I designed all the shows, And then I switched to costume design. I never knew there was a job as a costume designer. But David Mamet was, do you know David Mamet? David Mamet was my teaching assistant. I went to school with David Mamet, and when I was a junior in college, I sort of thought, maybe this is the job for me, because it's everything I love in one job. It's craft, it's literature, it's storytelling, and it's history. And so it's everything I love in one job. And then I went to graduate school and started designing for the theater. And the theater is the best.
I'm going to take advantage of the privilege of my position by asking the final question.
Oh.
You were talking about color and pattern.
Oh, yeah.
And recently I was watching some 20th Century Fox musicals from the 1940s, which
Yes.
have very, very bright colors.
Yeah.
And it's an enormous pleasure to see how the director is using color in terms of foreground, middle ground, background.
Yes.
I think also of Douglas Sirk using color in
Yes.
Universal films, the intensity of the colors, the saturation of the colors, which give us pleasure.
Yes, it's true.
I have some frustration as a contemporary film critic with the idea that somehow we seem to have lost the pleasure of color in many, for many films. The tonalities are more monochrome for various reasons. They're setting mood in a different way. We've moved on. I'm not saying we need to go back. Are there directors who you think appreciate color now, who understand?
You mean other than Wes?
Yeah, of course.
Other than Wes Anderson? Well, look, it's everyone's seen La La Land, right? So it depends. Sometimes color is associated with genre. So really, when you're talking about Fox musicals or musicals, I'm thinking of Betty Grable and those musicals.
Exactly.
Right, of course, and many of them designed by Charles Lemaire or Jean-Louis or René Hubert. I have to say that in the 40s they really needed color, right? Everyone really needed color very badly because life was not very colorful in the 1940s. So that color from Fox was meant to be an antidote to the time. Yeah. So let's just put that out there, right?
Definitely.
Let's just say that. The other thing is color has to be dealt with. Well, as I did with my example, my teaching example, very, very carefully. And if you just go back to the frame. Now, I know that digitally we don't have frames anymore, and we don't have sprockets anymore, but we are locked into this rectangle.
Yeah.
And when I talk to my students, we're locked in. And so in terms of learning how to work as an art director or a costume designer, it's very important to be a painter and to learn about point perspective and learn about the shallow frame, where a shallow frame, which is like in soap operas where everybody is standing lined up and talking to each other like this, like in a hieroglyphic, right? Everybody's talking in a shallow frame, or whether you have a very deep frame. So my feeling about color is there are directors who use color. I really like David O. Russell's movies. And so I love his movies because they feel realistic, but they're not as extreme as David Fincher's movies, which seem to be, I like Fincher's movies, but they always seem to have been bled dry, right? They're so desaturated. There's nothing left. They're chiaroscuro. They're just shades of gray. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
But is this what you were asking me?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because I miss the
You
pleasure
miss
of color.
it. You miss it. You miss your dessert.
Exactly.
Yeah, you want a little bit of that sugar. And it doesn't just have to be in comedy. But it does color requires a lot of care because it is so distracting. And if the point is that we never want to take our audience out of the story, we never want to distract by, you know what that's like having bad music and suddenly you're hearing the music, or something is sabotaging the story, right? Color can do that. It has to be used in a masterful way.
I think that's all
Sorry.
we have time. Why are you
Yeah.
sorry? I'm sorry that I have to end the conversation. Deborah Landis, thank you so much
Thank you.
your insight, for your passion, for the pleasure of your companies.
Thank you. I hope I wasn't too obtuse.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
It's never what people
Is it a problem? You're educating them into understanding what it is.
Thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, I was afraid of that.
Hi. Thank you for smiling the whole time. As with the eyes, you also can smile. You were smiling at me the whole time. I felt so reassured.